Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a level 80 Faith build, and this is going to be centered around the new update that came for Endure and Inescapable Frenzy. In patch 1.07, both Endure and Inescapable Frenzy got buffed. The grab is now a little bit further for Inescapable Frenzy, and Endure lasts longer and does quite a bit of poise negotiation. So these two things together, I felt like just needed a new showcase because in 1.06, Inescapable Frenzy really got nerfed into the ground. There were all these different aspects of it that were broken, like the effects of your right-handed weapon would apply to the Inescapable Frenzy grab. So if you had high crit damage and something like bleed buildup, both the bleed buildup and the high crit damage would apply, and the numbers you could get out of it were just like pretty insane. So after 1.06, they fixed all of that, and now it gets normal buffs that are not associated with your right-handed weapon, but it wasn't that strong. And now 1.07, we're going to take a look at how viable it is in PvP. For those of you that never used it before 1.06, I definitely recommend that you take a look at the Fextra Life page. It has a detailed list of all the different ways that it was broken, and it was pretty interesting. With that said, let's just go ahead and get into the build. So I had two different setups for this. At the beginning, I was using the Star Fist, and this was Sacred Infused. That made sense to me just because I'm used to using Endure on fist weapons, and the extra poise damage negotiation is pretty helpful. But I found that putting it on something like a rapier class weapon was a little bit better just because Inescapable Frenzy wouldn't guarantee a kill like it used to before patch 1.06. So having something that would come out really quick and be good for chase downs, I found to be very useful. So I have some invasions with the Star Fist as my main weapon, but at a certain point I realized that having something like a rapier was going to be better. So both of these are going to be level 17, and then the Frenzied Flame is +7. Because we're going for a grab attack, we want to have pretty high poise. So for this, I'm using mostly the Crucible Knight set and then the Bullgoat Gauntlets, and then I'm also using the Bullgoat's Talisman. In addition to the Bullgoat Talisman, I'm going to be using the Fire Scorpion Charm because Inescapable Frenzy does fire damage, and then the Phlox Canvas Talisman, which boosts incantations. I'll also have Erdtree's Favor +2, but that's not super necessary. However, this is somewhat of a glass cannon build for level 80. 39 Vigor is on the low side, but I wanted to buff Inescapable Frenzy as much as possible. Speaking of stats, I also went for 20 Endurance and 45 Faith. I wanted to get as much Faith as possible just to boost the Inescapable Frenzy attack, and then I also have 12 Mind. This was enough for me to endure once, use Inescapable Frenzy, endure again, and then use Inescapable Frenzy again. So there's two potential chances for you to land this within one FP bar. If you wanted to, you could definitely increase mind a little bit or run this at a higher build where you have a little bit more mind. But for me, I found this to be enough. If you're landing two Inescapable Frenzies, you should be killing your opponent and getting some more FP back. So that was my approach, but having a little bit more mind wouldn't be a bad thing. As for the physics I'm using, I have the Flame Shrouding Crack tier as well as the Faith Knot tier. These are both going to be pretty necessary. You want to buff Inescapable Frenzy as much as possible because if you land it, you want to do just as much damage as you can. So that's the recommendation I have. Both of these do buff the attack, but if you wanted to use one for something health related, I'd probably remove the Faith Boosting tier and switch it up for something like the Crimson Bubble tier. The moveset strategy for this build is pretty straightforward. You have the normal thrusting attacks that come with the Rapier class, where running heavies and running lights are both pretty strong. Jumping lights and jumping heavies should be delayed. And the name of the game here is to do Endure and then Inescapable Frenzy. So you'll pretty much never get stunned when you use Endure. I was hit with a Halberd using Giant Hunt, and Endure resisted that poise damage. So I would say in most cases, if you're not dead from the damage that you receive, you'll probably land Inescapable Frenzy if they're using an Ash of War against you that is going to be close to your body. In addition to the melee attacks and the Inescapable Frenzy attack, you'll also have access to other incantations that might be useful in the context of this build. I would say Catch Flame would be pretty nice, and Flame of Frenzy would also be pretty useful. both of these are going to get buffed by the different fire buffs that you have, like your talismans and your mixed physics. So they're not a bad option, but for me, I was really just trying to land Inescapable Frenzy. So that's how I approached it, but other incantations can be useful in the context of an invasion. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about how to set up this build and the strategies we'll be employing. So let's just go ahead, jump into the invasions, and see if we can grab some people. This first invasion is a quick 2v1 where they were pretty resistant to attacking me. I would say they were worried about PvE getting involved, so I tried to bait them at the beginning, but they weren't really biting. You can also see how much damage I'm taking. I do have the Fire Scorpion Charm on, which increases the amount of damage that I take, but I would say that's pretty necessary. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a little bit of a glass cannon build. The amount of damage that you take is kind of going to be difficult, but here it does pay off. I'm able to interrupt their Ash of War with Inescapable Frenzy and take care of the Phantom. So that definitely felt pretty good, and now that it's a 1v1 situation, I feel okay. But it is it's a little bit difficult to manage 1v1 situations if your opponent is pretty smart. So here they're not really appreciating the fact that I'm going to try to grab them. So I grab them there and then think that I've killed them, bow, realize that I haven't, and start to chase them down a little bit with my sword. But I feel like, you know, what's better than 2 Inescapable Frenzies? Let's go for a third. And they're just swinging away, so I managed to get the third. Which does show that it is viable as an attack if your opponent is not showing any respect for it. Next up, we have another 2v1, and this, I would say the opponents were a little bit stronger. They were spacing a bit better and just trying to avoid getting hit with a little bit better accuracy. So you'll notice that I've got the Star Fists, and they're okay, but they really lack range. They do more poise damage now, so fist weapons were buffed in that perspective where you're more likely to poise break your opponent, but they just don't have too much range. And if somebody has a straight sword which comes out quickly, they're usually going to be able to attack and then dodge out of whatever attacks I'm sending their way before I can land them. So I would say switching to the rapier felt like the right move when I was creating this build, but you can kind of see some of the deficiencies of the fist weapons, at least in this particular attack. But eventually the PvE gets involved, and I use Endure, and then they hit me a couple times, but it's not enough, and I'm able to land Inescapable Frenzy while the PvE is kind of distracting them. So that's definitely going to be an important strategy, is just use any opportunities, especially related to PvE, to your advantage. If you can take care of, you know, one Phantom just with a grab attack like that, you're going to be in business to get rid of the second one if they're not particularly good. And that's kind of something I feel like I need to say. Skilled opponents are probably not going to fall for this more than once. They may fall for it once if they're using an Ash of War and they don't know that you have it on your build, but once they see it, I think they're going to play pretty differently and just be ready for it. So that's something to be aware of. Like, you're not going to be able to land this consistently. Like, you can see I just missed there, even though they were pretty close to me. They jumped almost right into it. So that's part of this. I think I was fortunate enough to have pretty aggressive hosts and phantoms to be playing with, so I was able to land it a lot throughout this invasion showcase, but that's more due to the deficiencies of the players I'm playing against and less to do with my skill and the viability of that particular incantation. This next one is going to be a pretty good example of the increased range associated with the incantation. I feel like previously, you know, you really didn't get much range with this, so being able to just take a step forward during the grab attack can be pretty helpful. But you'll also see, I believe I lose this invasion, and why using this kind of as the cornerstone of your build is potentially not a great idea. They've got somebody shield poking and somebody with Moonveil, but there's a grab where the range is just a little bit further. My opponent wasn't right up in my face, and I'm still able to land Inescapable Frenzy. And then I did want to land it again, so I get a poke chain right here, and if I had just kept pressing R1, I'm pretty sure I would have killed them, but instead I go for an Endure and then another Endure, which was not the right play. They able to combo me with the Moonveil attack, and I die there. So that's going to be part of this build, is just you'll land it sometimes and it'll feel pretty cool, and then you'll get wrecked other times because you're running a build that is a little bit silly. But I don't know, Elden Ring is a fun game and there's lots of kind of funny stuff you can do in it. So if you're able to take on the challenge of using something like Inescapable Frenzy when you land it and are successful with it, I think it's all the more rewarding. Next up, we have a 3v1, which I was actually pretty proud of. I was expecting that I might win some 2v1s and some 1-on-1s, but having a 3v1 situation is a little bit scary when you're using a build that's not super optimal, especially one that's focused so much on landing a really close quarters attack. So they have one Phantom that's using a whip with Storm Stomp. I'm able to roll out of that because I used Endure recently, so that gave me a little bit extra poise, which negotiated the poise damage that the Storm Stomp did, and then there they Storm Stomp again, but I Endure and then Inescapable Frenzy them. So I would say it's a strong counter to Ashes of War, where you're expecting a true combo or something, but you know, you have to be lucky. Like Storm Stomp is a great one where you are more likely to land it, but if your opponents realize what you're doing, then they're probably not going to fall for it. But here we have another example of somebody going for their Ash of War, and I'm able to Inescapable Frenzy them, but it doesn't kill them. So that's another aspect of this that I wanted to talk about, is just the damage output. I have a buff from 2 of my talismans, as well as a buff from both of my physics tiers. So that's 4 buffs, all centralized on Inescapable Frenzy, and it still doesn't one-shot people. When you have a game where so many less skill-intensive attacks one-shot people, I think for this one, it does make sense to one-shot people pretty consistently, especially if you're going to buff it the way that I've buffed it. If you sacrifice damage negotiation and everything, you're, I think, in a situation where something is fair. So here you can see I miss it, and then I just get completely wrecked in the corner by, you know, this group of 3. So I put this in the showcase because I felt like it's pretty indicative of what you might expect some of the time. You know, a well-oiled machine of a 3v1 where somebody has a Moog Spear, somebody is spamming another AoE attack, it's just not going to really go in your favor unless you have time and space. This was kind of interesting. This was before some of my buffs, and there was a Phantom that wasn't playing, which allowed me to grab them. So in this prior version, I don't think I had all the right talismans and all the right flasks to buff the attack, and it did like half their health, which is kind of disappointing, I would say. Like a completely unbuffed or only slightly buffed version of this did 500 damage, which is something you can get with jumping attacks with colossal weapons, especially at this weapon level and invasion level. And here you're getting rewarded with 500 damage for something that is a huge risk. So I would say that's something to keep in mind, and just kind of speaks to the way I'd like to see this particular incantation changed. I don't think there'd be too much pushback if it did, you know, 1,500 damage or even just 1,200 damage consistently at rune level 80, because it's hard to grab your opponent. They really need to kind of misplay in most situations, and I don't know, it feels like an attack where the community would not really be upset about it being stronger, especially when, you know, Giant Hunt is such a low risk, high reward Ash of War that does tons and tons of damage. So you can see that with Endure and Inescapable Frenzy, I'm able to land the grab fairly consistently, but it doesn't really make it particularly useful. That said, I still really enjoyed making this video. I think trying stuff out like this and just seeing if they become viable as time goes on is part of the fun of this game. So as for strategies, if you're going to employ this method, I'd say one big aspect of it is don't just spam the grab attack and endure, hoping that you're going to get them immediately. I would say play your opponent out a little bit, lull them into some sort of sense of security that they understand your moveset and what you're going for. Because as soon as you use Inescapable Frenzy, it gives them really valuable information. So here, this was an invasion where I didn't use it at all, and then they went for Dragon Breath, which was just the perfect opportunity since you stand still for the Dragon Breath incantation. So that's the approach that I took, is just using it as a surprise. Maybe use Endure once or twice without using Inescapable Frenzy. Let them think that they understand what you're going for exactly, and then surprise them with Inescapable Frenzy. And I would say if you can, chip them a little bit first, so that it will kill them in one shot because they do not at full health. It's hard to know how much damage you're actually going to do with it, but I would say if they're below 75% or 2/3 of their health, then if you land it, you're probably going to be in business. So this is a perfect opportunity here. They have low health and I go for it, but I don't land it. They easily roll out of it. But then they go for their Ash of War, and that was something that I could punish pretty easily with Endure. I would say when it comes to Endure and the timing of it, I would almost think of it as timing it in the same way you would Storm Stomp or a parry, where you want to take the damage of their hits because it's going to be heavily negotiated from just the way that Endure works. And you want them to swing, hit you, and then while they're in their recovery frames, go for your Unescapable Frenzy. So right here you can see I let them hit me with both great swords. Doesn't do a ton of damage because I just used Endure. And then I'm able to land Inescapable Frenzy without too much of an issue. So if you approach it like a parry or Storm Stop or something where you know that the swing is going to land, I think you're probably going to be more successful with it. That just about covers everything that I wanted to say about this particular incantation and moveset associated with it. The strategy is, fairly simple on the surface, at least, just like use Endure and then use Inescapable Frenzy. In general, though, I would say the psychology of your tactics are going to be really helpful in terms of how you are successful in employing this. I should mention here, we do have a Giga Chad situation where the host is just holding a shield and seems pretty unperturbed by my presence, which, I respect. But you will see in just a moment, one of the advantages of Inescapable Frenzy is that you can, in fact, go through shields. So just because somebody's blocking doesn't mean they're going to be protected from it. So that's another good thing to keep in mind if you have a situation like this where somebody's not really trying to do anything but block, which I don't think comes up that often, but sometimes. Or especially if somebody's trying to just shield poke you, it's a great option in terms of, just endure through their shield pokes and then grab them with the Inescapable Frenzy. So yeah, I would say it's a really fun build to use. It's not going to be meta ever, at least in this patch. And if you can land it, it feels great. But I would say just kind of be prepared to take some losses in the process. I'm going to go ahead and let the rest of these invasions just play out, and you can take a look for the different strategies that I mentioned throughout the beginning of this video and see how they were implemented here. But that's pretty much all I have to say. There's a little bit more information just about channel updates in the end of this video, so if you want to skip to the outro, feel free. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. I appreciate everybody's support, everybody adding to watch time, likes, subscriptions. It all really helps grow the channel, and we've seen quite a bit of growth in the last couple days. I think specifically related to patch 1.07. So I've been trying to upload content as much as possible. So it'll be my third video in 3 days, which is much faster for me. But these do take 6 to 8 hours in some cases. So I work a full-time job, and that's not super practical for every day of the week. But I do like making this, and I want to produce content as often as I can. So just if you're new here, I wouldn't expect this type of release schedule. But yeah, I appreciate everybody joining, and I'll keep the content coming. Thanks.